land the Go Open Data Association is webcasting from is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto was built on sacred land that is part of an agreement between Indigenous peoples and extended to allied nations to peacefully and respectfully care for it.
Go Open Data. This is Mission Control. You are go for lunch.
Take some time away from your office bay to the Good Cafe. Open data, go open data, open data, go open data. We meet up virtually. All our beverages are free for open data coffee. Welcome to the Good Cafe.
Indeed, welcome. It is Thursday, September the 8th, 2022. This is the Good Cafe. We're back after a brief break in the summer. I am Keith McDonald. Pick that up. I'm Keith McDonald, the Director of Communications for Go Open Data Association and also the barista for the Good Cafe. And today we've got a very interesting guest. I'd like to introduce you to her in 1 second. We're talking about data analysis and data paralysis, by the way, today. And Francisca Fortes is our guest. And Francisca harmonizes data science, financial analysis, system design, and investigative research with critical and creative thinking. And that's not all. She's heavily involved in things like investments and Century Investments, KPMG Women in Capital Markets. She attended Wilfrid Laurier University, the University of British Columbia, Pragmatic Institute. She's also part of Toastmasters. And some of her skills we're going to talk about later, but things like Python and R, HTML. I mean, I used to say I was bilingual with HTML and English. So you're multilingual, Francisca. And that's it. Let's bring her in and take a look at Francisca. I'm just going to get up the gallery view. That should bring her, both of us up. And yes, I've got that there. Okay, am I back? Yes, okay, we got the two of us finally. So welcome, how are you?
Thank you, Keith. I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. And I also forgot to say you're our newest volunteer for the Go Open Data Association. So welcome aboard as a volunteer, and finding out about your background, we thought it would be great to actually do a cafe with you and talk a bit about data analytics and what that means, what you enjoy about it, any other frustrations that you've had in doing it as a career. And I guess the first question I want to talk to you about is just what do you do as a data analyst? What are some of the features and skills that you bring to the table?
Thanks, Keith. Well, data analytics is jam-packed with absolutely everything. It can be any sort of data. It could be finance, it could be your heartbeat, it could be ecological surveys, marketing, metrics. It can be anything. And data analytics just kind of looks to harness all of that data that you have and figure out what do we do with it? How do we ensure that this data is useful? How do we clean it? So that would include doing some kind of transformations to it. And then from there, modeling it and trying to see kind of a visualization. What is this data trying to tell us? And what are we trying to find out about it? So data analytics is really all encompassing and can be in any industry, really. It can be applicable. So it's really fun in that sense to be able to go from group to group and be able to help them out with their data. Because you get such a broad range of interesting projects.
What attracted you to it, though, as a career? Was it very early in, even high school, or was it after that, or what was the trigger?
I think in high school, I was really into art and mathematics, and then I really got into economics, which kind of led me more into a business program, which I thought would be more like economics, but I guess it wasn't so theoretical based. And within business, there's a lot of strategic talk, a lot of understanding like human behavior. So the analytics for me really came in and what do we do with data? So I got more into equity research. So that's looking at the stock market, looking at, big companies and their financials, and getting into data analytics, learning how do you look at so much data, so many numbers, and how do you harness the power of programming with that? So that's what led to using Python or R or things like Tableau, Power BI, and other business intelligence tools to be able to harness all of that information coming in. Because it's hard to just kind of look at something and think, okay, there's a trend there, but how do I really know, or how do I compare that to maybe another company? So getting into data analytics was pretty gradual and natural for me, I would say, because I wanted to have more of that foundational aspect to it, based in the data and in the numbers and what's actually there, because you can't really understand something until you actually put it down and study it, really.
It's interesting to me. I mean, at the intro, I was talking about Python and R, but I'm just going to read the list here. This is what you know: Python, R, HTML, Bash, SQL. You speak Spanish, it spells, speaking of languages. TensorFlow, Matplotlib, sklearn, QuantStat, Pandas, Apis. Plus, you're familiar with Amazon Web Services, Apache Spark, Azure, Google Cloud Services, Power BI, Tableau, Power Query, Microsoft Office, G Suite, Notion, and Bloomberg. Now that's a huge list. So all this didn't come at once, obviously.
Yeah.
So how did you? Are you like osmosis? You just suck it all in. You start with one, and then you move to another. And how challenging did you find it? To get there, to be proficient in all these different aspects? Because I think this is what perhaps our audience finds most overwhelming in terms of actual doing the data analysis. Like, where do I get started, and how easy is it? So.
Yeah, I think, well, in terms of the business analysis tools like Tableau and Power BI that came from work, there's a lot of push towards, making our company profits and our costs analysis and all of that available to the whole organization, and putting it in some kind of dashboard format. So learning that came through work, but then the actual Python bits, a little bit of some courses in school. And then it's mostly just finding people online on YouTube. I can send you some links of some great resources, and seeing what they do with the different languages, and the power of R, and maybe what kind of data sets that they're taking, and seeing how they approach the problem, and trying it out for yourself. I guess the hardest part is, how do you get set up? How do you prepare your computer to run these kind of programs? That was the hardest part for me, I think, was understanding, how do I get the environment of my computer to get started? And there's so many platforms out there. So it is a lot of kind of, you try it, then you learn about something else, and then suddenly next week something else comes out, and this other article comes out saying this is better than this and you should try this one. But as long as you're kind of sticking through it, and choose a platform, a lot of platforms are the same, in the sense that you're still using whatever programming language, say Python, within it, but you can be using Visual Code Studio, or you could be using Google Colab Labs. There's a lot out there, but it's just stick to it and try to get through a whole project, and then learn from that, and then you could try to kind of carry on to the next thing. I've definitely done a few times where I kind of wiped my whole computer to try to start fresh because of changes that I made in my global system versus a virtual system. And it's all just kind of trial and error. So don't let it bog you down. Try to find somebody that can help you through those hard things. And YouTube's such a great resource, and maybe like Patreon, finding people that can lead you through it. But don't be afraid to play around, I'd say.
Well, we've been, it's interesting to say that, because we've been considering doing some training, and we're looking at a pilot coming up in the new year that's actually going to talk about Tableau. So yeah, I think you're saying, though, you have to have kind of an interest in it, which I think is, maybe it's a challenge for some of our members. And I remind anybody listening, if you want to ask a question, just throw it in the chat, and we'll talk about it. And I'd be interested to know from the audience standpoint too, about anybody who's attempted or in fact feels they're proficient in it. Because I think you obviously need people like yourself who will do the work. And certainly we know governments are hiring people, more so than ever. Back in the beginnings of open data, that wasn't really the case. And I think what I experienced working for the city of Toronto was a lot of the inside data analysis weren't comfortable with outside data analysts looking at the data for all kinds of different reasons. Sometimes I think they were worried they were going to uncover things or attack certain approaches. It was like a negative approach to it, was the thought. That didn't prove to be the case. And I think a lot more government people are more comfortable now working with people. But do you find in let's say searching for government data, it's difficult to find? And if you've reached out to the governments, have you had good experiences or bad experiences?
I think that it has been pretty difficult. For example, I'm working on a project right now trying to look at homelessness and the different encampments that have popped up all over Ontario, especially in Toronto and here where I live in Kitchener-Waterloo. I drive by a place where I've seen this encampment grow and grow and grow, and I was interested in looking at some aerial images to see how that has changed, to maybe also see where it is happening in other places. And yeah, finding that aerial image databases that are uploaded on a regular basis and are, good enough quality. Even looking at Google Earth wasn't that great because the time periods that the data was uploaded aren't consistent. And I actually wasn't showing what I see with the real eye, right? So I have reached out to University of Waterloo, to the Kitchener Waterloo, kind of like the public governing council here, and I have had a little bit of feedback. Most of it is that you have to pay for the aerial imagery. But you have to kind of do a lot of digging. So that's kind of what goes in hand with these kinds of projects is you have to put your investigative hat on and try to find every route and explore all those routes, reach out to people, email, sign up for the different APIs, even if they're, in the beta, and just see what comes back. So you have to keep track of all those sources. I personally use Notion to help me keep track of all the places where I've reached out, so that I can go back and see, oh, this worked out, this didn't. Maybe I can use this for a different project, for example. But I find that some other kind of information, like I was looking at the StatsCan, and they have polling information of like maps of where they are. They have a lot of demographic information available for the different neighborhoods. So there is quite a bit of data sets, and they've even set up some APIs to make it easy to actually draw that data out so you can use it in your own analysis. So it's been good seeing that kind of progress being made on part of the government to allow us to take hand of that data and what we're going to do with it. Yeah, you have to really dig. You have to dig hard.
I think that's, I don't even want to say an interesting comment. I think it's a very accurate comment, I guess. And I've been involved personally in the open data arena since 2008. And in the early days, you forget about APIs. You're not going to release anything that could be used. And for those who aren't quite sure what an API is, it's basically a key that people can access your information and hook up a little easier than going through complex ways of finding and accessing the data. And a lot of the open data sites have started to enable those things, and it's all good, I think. But in some ways, it's still one step forward, two steps back. At least I feel that way because of what you're saying. You have to do a lot of digging. So you're really saying that one of the skills you need is a bit of the investigator bug to be willing to research to that degree where it may be a little muddy to get to the clean stuff. And I know Good wants to help support, I guess, continuation, getting further faster, so that stuff is provided. And I think homelessness is an interesting issue because certainly it's one of the topics that's front of mind. An election is coming up across Ontario, municipalities, I should say. So yeah, I'd like to see that on the discussions with prospective councillors and even the current crop who are already councillors and are running again, to see what their answers might be. So that's just an aside again for folks thinking about it. If anybody's knocking on their doors or they happen to go places where somebody's running, certainly ask about open data and say APIs. You don't have enough APIs, and see what they say.
Yeah, and also kind of they're all this wanting information and trying to do the projects on it. It comes out of curiosity. I don't think that there's malintent behind it, right? I'm not trying to find this information so I can go up to somebody and be like, you're not doing enough. And it's more just to get it out there. It needs to just kind of be put on paper and look, this is the trend. And it looks like something is happening over here because we've seen these trends happen before. And here it is in the data. Can you please see this? And it's just kind of getting the message out there. So I hope it's taken in a positive way, because we're not trying to make anyone embarrassed or try to say that the government's not doing enough. I mean, I think everybody can be a part of that conversation, and all of it is a positive contribution.
I'm smiling broadly because you're so kind. I'm less kind because I think it's always been difficult to get data. For the most reasons I found in my own experience was the fact that they thought that something bad would happen with it. They'd uncover something, or they'd slam us and they'd say, you're not doing processes and stuff. And I do think the actual experiences were far different from that. Although anytime something happens to hit the media that is negative, that's the trigger point, and that's what they're afraid of. And it does happen occasionally. And a friend of mine I was talking to recently used the word about flirting with open data. And I really like this. I'm going to write something about it too. The idea of, oh, they're only flirting with us, in the meantime, they're dating other things like this, which is all important. Of course, one of the challenges they face is this importance of solving issues, and that no one's questioning that. But the fact is they're missing the point that data can help understand and reflect on, where are some of these problem points, and all of that can be advantaged through open data. And that's where the flirting comes in. They haven't really asked us out yet, real date. And they occasionally give us gifts like, okay, there's an open data license, thank you. And they actually put data on the website, okay, thank you. But it's really just kind of like a placebo, I think. So I take a much stronger stance than you. I think we need to push harder. And you either commit to it, guys, or it's just lip service, right? Talk is cheap. So let's get to it. But I think your take is quite valid. You don't want to embarrass people. That's not going to be very helpful. So yeah, one must step carefully and cautiously. But building a relationship is obviously a good thing as well. So in your experience, I guess, in doing some of this and bringing people along with your outcomes, do you find you need visualizations, or, where do you publish the stuff, or how do you exhibit what you've done?
Sometimes it's just kind of on a GitHub, just putting it out there. There's a great organization, actually, where I saw you for the first time was at Data for Good at the Waterloo chapter. That's where I saw you doing an interview and reached out to you. So Data for Good is one of the chapters that they have here in Waterloo, and they take data from organizations that are for not-for-profit. They're called social sector organizations. And they have a group of data scientists do a hackathon for a week. These organizations will give the data scientists the data, and the data scientists can go and uncover whatever insights that they can. So usually that means kind of showing your workflow, what kind of tools you're using, what libraries you're using. And then at the end of the day, you want to be able to have that insight and say, these are the qualitative aspects that came out of it. And yeah, definitely visualizations help. I also find that pairing data analysis with authors and kind of like the more qualitative aspects of research. For example, I worked on a Twitter engagement for them for Data for Good. And I just happened to be reading a book about marketing and how to engage your audience, and kind of like the steps of how your audience feels like they're part of your group, what makes them feel like a member. So a lot of that qualitative thinking drove a lot of my analysis and what I wanted to kind of look into to see if it was true. And it's really interesting to pair it in that kind of way. You don't want to just say, oh, these are the these are the top 5 hashtags that you can use so that you get more Twitter engagement. You want to kind of get to the crux of it, of why are the members of your group responding to the types of Twitters that that you put out. What is it about the content? So kind of bringing it back to like a human level is really important. And in the data analysis, that I find is kind of what I look for more than just kind of like graphs and this is higher than that and all this kind of relativity. You want to kind of get these kind of nuggets of truth, if you will.
Nuggets. I like that. You mentioned human too. I mean, where does artificial intelligence come into play in some of the programs? I mean, are you finding more assistance from actual like built-in programming that does a lot of the work, or is it still a lot of human sweat, blood and sweat and tears?
No, there's yeah, it's now artificial intelligence is kind of thought of as like a factory. You kind of put something in, it goes through some processes and it comes out like that. But like they always say, like garbage in, garbage out. So a lot of the human process is looking at what are you putting into the into the factory, and trying to make meaning of what's coming out is really difficult. You have to be able to kind of go back and retry different hypotheses and not get stuck on, okay, this is the answer that I got from doing a TF-IDF analysis on the words that are in this, this brochure. The human aspect comes from understanding other people. So it also comes down to, how is the data collected? Can we rely on the data? And that also is part of the human aspect of it. You can't just kind of take the data and say, okay, great, that's a number, I'm going to put it into my model. Especially at work, you have to think, how are the different teams using this type of label, or how are they tracking, and is everybody on board with the type of tracking or data tracking, and are they using it in the way that it's meant to? So there's a lot of like kind of a pre-investigation of your data that needs to be done, because there is a lot of that behavioral aspect and bias that goes into it, especially we see in natural language processing. I'm sure you've heard of words being labeled positive or negative sentiment, neutral sentiment. It's a person that kind of has to label that. So there's always that inherent bias that you have to think about. And it's a little bit daunting, a little bit scary to know that we're building upon these models. So you have to keep that in mind as well when you're using that kind of data.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about bias actually, because it really can come in two areas, right? It can from the collection standpoint, those who collect it, and then from the data analyst standpoint too, right? If you see stuff, I mean, this would be the worst side of it, I suppose, and you decide not to use it because you're biased toward it, right? Or you don't think it meets your agenda, I suppose. And I think one of the challenges, we've talked a lot about this at Good, and some of our programming has dealt with the issue too, and it seems to be one of the hardest things to get over. I mean, in fact, many people would say it's just impossible. You're going to have bias. I was talking recently with a person who talked about that and said, you got to throw in all the biases then. More bias, the better in a way, because then you can see the variables around it, right? So that this is saying that, and that thing is saying this, and yeah, I think it's a caution. So I'm interested that you raised that as an issue. And that must be a hard challenge for data analysts too, right? I mean, do you have any kind of a scale, or how do you identify? Is it just emerged as that's a bias, or it's? Do you even look at how the data was collected? I mean, a lot of sites won't provide that kind of context. It's just there, and they won't say what their process was. Was it hundreds of people or thousands, or So how do you go about? Do you deliberately look for it, or do you just let it bubble up?
Yeah, one of the first steps would be, where are you finding the gaps in the data compared to like the rest of the data set that you have? Maybe there's one part of the survey that a lot of people didn't fill out, so maybe you have to throw that part of the survey away or that question away. But I think it definitely lies within the people that work with the data on the ground base. and asking them those kind of questions, and encouraging them to put those kind of like a warning before you do this. This is what's behind this data, and this particular part of the data set is new or is biased towards this, or we change this. So having those kind of disclaimers would be really great. I know that a lot of data sets also come with descriptions of each column, of exactly what it means. And some of them go even deeper into that metadata, which is really great to have. And if you don't see a lot of that, then again, reach out to wherever that data was collected and ask them. They know best, and let them know that a better practice would be to actually put out that information. And again, don't hide the flaws of your data. That makes it almost even more flawed. If there are flaws in the data, you want to put that out there and not be afraid of the backlash that you're going to get, because it's better to kind of be upfront and say, hey, the way that this data was collected, this part, maybe we have a little bit of differences in the way that it was collected between the different ways that people approach the question. So yeah, it's all about kind of just getting everybody's input and understanding that, and hopefully once it's discovered, then from there, hopefully just move forward and be more clear, because the first thing has to happen is you have to know that there's a problem and then work towards rectifying it.
Yeah, it's just reasonable. And I think, again, what I find is there's such symmetry and an ethos almost of people in the open data community. That includes data analysts, includes government workers who are trying to supply open data and so on. And it's just what you said, right? Work together, get it out there, clarify what it is you did, invite comments and what could we do better regard to this survey or whatever. It's a communication vehicle as well as just a resource, right? There's no reason that it has to just be data exclusively with no connectivity. And we talk about civic engagement, and I mean, everything you're talking about, I think, is just that. And it's so interesting then when you come across the resistance to it. But on a positive note, I think we had an RCMP person speak at our conference about how deeply the RCMP is going to, I believe his name is Scott, I should check. But they're deeply into releasing their data, and it's relatively new in that sense. And of course, the Toronto police have just released some data on crime, and there was mixed reaction to that. Is it just kind of a placebo to stop people criticizing the police? I mean, I felt differently. I thought this was a great first step, and it certainly wasn't perfect for all kinds of reasons. But I think these are really great examples that weren't happening 10 years ago. So, maybe there's some success with the attitude that you're presenting. I think, how could someone be upset with you if you're approaching them that way, right? I think that's most likely the best way to go about it. And our hope, I think, would be that we just see more of that instead of less of that. And certainly cities that aren't really releasing data yet, maybe they can get started. I did want to talk a bit about your work on the Uyghurs situation in China, which is more and more information comes out on that every day. What inspired you to go there and and what kind of research are you actually doing?
I can share this really great article. So the article itself was a data science kind of how-to, and it was about how to use kind of open source intelligence, like journalism. And a lot of it is piecing together what we can from different data sources. A lot of it is kind of maybe like a paid subscription to get some aerial footage. Some of it comes from brave YouTubers that go and maybe visit the place and speak on it. There's a lot that goes to it, and it also includes a lot of inherent risk for the people that are uncovering and people that are providing the data. There's a really great resource called the Kit, the investigation kit, and it gets into a lot of how to deal with data that is not, that is risky, essentially. that is maybe, hitting some buttons that don't want to be hit. So I encourage everyone to look at the kit, the investigation kit, and it tells you how to kind of keep yourself and everyone else safe when you're doing this kind of investigative work. But yeah, the project itself was a how-to, and it goes very in depth on how they themselves have used aerial imaging to see how these camps have changed over the years, so that they can also predict where these camps are growing and what's happening with the changes in landscape, with the changes to certain buildings that maybe used to be a recreation center and has now been maybe changed into one of these encampments. So it's just kind of getting that thought out there. So the article was about that, and also encouraging other data scientists to use this same type of framework to maybe uncover other issues that are at hand. So if I'm using the same framework to do the homelessness and the encampments that are happening here in Ontario. So that was very much hand in hand. And
one of the reasons I asked the question is that it does demonstrate the research side, like the data journalism side. And again, some of the fears that local governments might have is that someone might approach that. Now, the example in China, I think, is really significant as we look at things quite differently regards to the system of government and everything else. And that's why I think it's an interesting project from that standpoint, simply because of the sensitivities around it, the political nature around it, especially if you were in government yourself doing this. I mean, look what happened when Pelosi visited Taiwan, right? So yeah, maybe you could just a quick look of how you gathered that. That would be fantastic.
I think I saw it on a Medium article. Medium has a lot of it's a subscription. You can subscribe to them, and they have amazing authors there that are all within the data science community, and a lot of how-tos on this one in particular just kind of caught my eye because obviously it's social, oh my God, just disaster. It's awful. And it really spoke to me. And I really appreciated the way that the author put out the information for everyone to use. He goes kind of step by step on how he got all the information and all the different resources and how they're used. So that, again, that's how I'm using that's how I'm trying to approach this project for homelessness here in Ontario, is using all the different resources for satellite imagery to kind of see beyond the obvious. And it takes work, like we kind of talked about at the very beginning of the show, is getting all this information is work. You have to email, you have to go through a lot of dead ends, kind of broken URLs. And that's okay. You just kind of keep going at it. And share that information. And maybe you find a lot of colleagues along the way that are interested in the work that you're doing, and you work together to do that and accomplish that together. So that's kind of a wonderful thing about this community, is the open source and the colleague aspect of it, that we're working all together, and libraries that are built on top of libraries that just kind of make this whole process easier and easier for the people that come down the road, right? And new data scientists and analysts.
Yeah, it's like crowdsourcing, as we call it, to lots of people who use that term. And I think when we talk about transparency and open government, this is some of the difficulties, I think, in delivery of just that. I think it's easiest for us to say with the Chinese system the way it is, president for life, etc., that it might be more difficult, but there is an open data movement in China happening. And so it's a bit of a contradiction. But then when we cycle back to our own country, we're not getting exactly a full open government or full transparency. And when we talk even about privacy, I think you've got a lot of people who are interested in that and are looking at things to uncover privacy breaches and things that we may not know about. And seems to me we're in this realm now that we're talking about, that the skill sets that can help do that. And I do think it's valuable, right? It's really important to have that. And a lot of people are saying journalism has suffered over the years. It's not what it used to be, and it's way more biased and it's way more opinionated.
Hmm.
I do think there's a kind of a hardcore group of data journalists who, and maybe it's because they're looking at data, rather than, let's say, interviewing people. They're interviewing data, if you like, right? It's maybe easier to uncover the bias or get the story. But as you say, lots of work, lots of effort, and there's nothing wrong with that. But would you say or agree that it seems obvious too, the more work the government side does in releasing their data, the better. Having it already converted into usable files as opposed to the, PDFs, etc. I mean, what's your take there? What would be the ideal work that the government could do to make your job easier, assuming they want to make your job easier? Like, what do they have to do?
I think what would be really interesting to see is kind of a almost like a job board where maybe you have people that are interested or journalists that are interested in uncovering certain aspects of social issues within Canada or environmental issues, and kind of seeing the open projects that are there and who to reach out to be part of it. For example, I went on I think it's called Open Canada website, and you can click and say take a look at the projects, but it kind of it doesn't link anywhere. It kind of has a description of the types of projects that maybe you could do with the data. You could do visualizations, you can do machine learning, and it has a little paragraph on some examples. But what might be really nice is kind of just a board of connections between people and see like where can you fit in, where can your skill set be used or helped out. For example, I would love to reach out to CBC and ask them, what are journalists working on, or how can I collaborate with a journalist and help them with their stories? What kind of data do you guys have access to that you need somebody with maybe my particular skill set to help with, so that you can uncover even more and have more of this kind of data-driven narrative. And also especially like in the infographics, and in the data behind them, they should tell a story, but they should also be open enough that the person looking at the infographic can make up their own narrative based on what's there. You don't have to tell the audience, this is what we got from the data. Kind of, here it is, we're presenting it, and these are some ways to identify with it or to understand it. So it's up to the reader to kind of make up their mind, but it's also about putting it in a digestible format that maybe a data scientist doesn't have the skill set to do the way that a journalist would, or the way that a journalist might kind of integrate everything together in a readable format. And then, I think there's a really great collaboration or like a synthesis there that's missing. That would be really great for the government to support.
It's interesting too, because I think the idea of collaboration sometimes is overlooked. Lately too, the open data movement has been talking about stories. Tell stories using your data. So maybe a little counter to what you said is that they would tell their story. And I think what's missing though is if they don't provide the data that they used in a machine readable format, so that it could be looked at. And I don't want to use these words like reviewed, because maybe that's not looked at as a positive thing. But if in fact other data people can replicate consistently the results that the government had, you're probably dealing with a good result. If, however, they can't, and there's something missing, then it's worth having that collaboration, the dialogue, to find out why. And it may be the data analyst's mistake on the outside, that they overlook something, right? I think you're echoing this idea for the open data community to keep saying that and enable it somehow. You talked about hackathons, for example. And this is where I think a lot of people, especially those who provide data or maybe aren't familiar with it could go to a hackathon and they could actually learn and see a lot of stuff happening that actually utilizes data, and also sometimes things that are missing, because what tends to happen, right, is the people in their speech back when they finished, let's say at the end of the day, they might say, well, we looked for this data set and we couldn't find it, or kind of, they might say everything was there that we needed. So for a non-practitioner who is in a high position in the government, manager, director, counselor, to hear and see that happen, it's a wonderful thing. And we've found lately, though, hackathons have, at least our experience has been, they've decreased in attendance. Would you find that true, or you think they're going as fast and furious as they used to? I mean,
I think I agree with you in the sense that they're not happening as frequently. So, I mean, I think it's also up to each individual to connect with the community of data scientists. If you have, colleagues or friends that have companies that have all this data and they don't know what to do with it, take it to maybe a Data for Good and say, what if we do a collaboration there? So it's kind of just about having this open dialogue of people knowing that there are communities that want to take on data, and try to find some insights for you for the betterment of the organization, of the betterment of whatever the mission is of the organization. So there has to be that dialogue that's open. There's so many data sets out there, so many projects that you can do. You can predict housing prices or whatever it is. But it's mostly, we want to have an impact, right? We want to have an impact with our city, where we live, our culture, and just having that dialogue open is so important. For example, I came across, it's called the Indigenous Climate Atlas launch, where they made this wonderful interactive map, and it shows how the Indigenous communities are being affected by climate change. And it's not a report, but it's an interactive dashboard where you can kind of tweak, okay, what if the weather goes this way, or what if there's less rainfall, or what if you get less cold days, and then it actually updates and it shows how each of those communities would be affected by that change in climate. So it's kind of projects like that you want to be really involved with, that I hope kind of make it to the forefront for this kind of community to make an impact.
Sometimes I think too that COVID had a lot to do with that rather than in person, it was virtual and stuff. That may have put a bit of a stymie to it and stuff. One of the things, Richard Pietro, who you haven't met yet, but Richard is well known to the Go Open Data community as well as open data community, not just in Ontario, but all over the place. He and I actually came up with a concept called open data in reverse, and we'll probably explore that in another cafe, which is kind of doing the thing you say, going forward and saying, we have this, but we're not sure what to do with it. Do you want it? How can you use it? And what do we have to do? That's open data in reverse. We've blasted through our time here. It's almost 1 o'clock, and I just want to wrap up with some of our links for those who are watching who can find out more about us. Thanks for sitting in with us today, and we will be seeing more of you in Go Open Data from Good. And thank you again for volunteering, and thank you for taking part today in the cafe. Hope your coffee didn't get cold because you didn't have a chance to drink anything there. So let's just go into some links here for people who may want to find out more about us. GoOpenData.ca, that's go/opendata.ca. And on LinkedIn, you can find us at LinkedIn/company/go-open-data. We also have a YouTube presence, of which this show will appear shortly. GoodTube.ca gets you there. And finally, if you want to mail us, connect at go-opendata.ca if you're interested in volunteering or just getting involved, even on a level like with our conference that's coming up in the fall. And so that's it again. Francisca Fortes was our guest today. Thank you again, Francisca. We'll just exit with a quick credit roll, and we'll see you next time on the Good Cafe. We'll be back in November, and we have some things coming up with an event in October that we'll be telling you more about. Check your social media outlets for that. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.